Hello, and a very warm welcome to this brief session on North American market trends. My name's Rachel Reed. I am Director of Insight here at ETOA, and I'm joined today by David Edwards, our resident tourism stats expert. So lovely to be speaking with you again, David. So, hello. I understand you've got some slides for us, which you'll present and we'll chat through as we go. So I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. So we are going to look at North America. However, we will start by looking at the global context. And what we're going to look at here is international arrivals compared with the equivalent month back in 2019. So this is all regions of the world. We can see that precipitous fall in the spring of 2020, a little bit of recovery in summer of 2020. Then we can see a bit more of a bulge in summer of 2021 before things started to dip a wee bit again with the presence of the Omicron variant and the end of 2021. So that's looking backwards globally. Let's look backwards in relation to outbound travel from the US. And this is the absolute number of outbound journeys from the US each month from the start of 2020. And certainly it would appear at first sight to be fairly encouraging, because we can see, while we're not back at early 2020 levels, by the end of 2021, certainly we were a long way towards that. However, a key point to note is that more than 3 in every 4 outbound trips in 2021 from the US were to Mexico, the Caribbean, or to Central America. And just as the case around the world, most international tourism is intra rather than inter-regional. Now let's look at the latest forecasts from Tourism Economics for outbound travel from North America indexed to 2019 being 100. We can see here that the projection is that, yes, there will be recovery throughout 2022 and onwards, but even by 2024, the latest projections suggest that we won't quite have made it back to where we were in 2019 for overall outbound travel from North America.
I always think, though, David, when we speak about that, because I know we've done a few of these sessions together, and we've looked at other ones where we're looking at tourism arrivals in the years up to 2019. And actually 2019 was a rather bumper year. So it is, in some ways, we could be doing ourselves a slight disservice, because actually they'll be up at 2018 levels, before that. So I think that that's also something encouraging to think about, isn't it?
That is certainly true. We had record year after record year for global international tourism in the decade running up to 2019 very much, with typically 4% year-on-year growth. So yes, you are quite right that while we're not back at that peak level, certainly if these projections prove to be true, we will be a long way there. Now, as we can see in the little text box, while international travel restrictions certainly seem now, fingers crossed, to be on an easing path, we need to recognise that the sector faces strengthening economic and geopolitical headwinds at the present time. Let's look now at separate data from the European Travel Commission. First off, looking at the preferred destinations that Americans are saying they intend to visit on their next European trip. And as you can probably figure out, they could tick as many of these as they wished, because the numbers sum to more than 100%. But I think the key takeaway here is it is those traditional destinations that Americans would visit in Europe, so France, Italy, the UK, that were most often cited. And if we look at the results from Canada for the same question, we can again see France, Italy, and the United Kingdom being the 3 most popular destinations for an intended trip to Europe, even though further down within the top 10, there is some variance compared with the US.
Yes, I thought that was actually very interesting, David, on that slide there. And I wondered if there's any more detail as to why Germany and Switzerland have the edge over Spain with Canadians. You can obviously see that in the data there. And I thought that was an interesting observation.
Some of it may well be to do with heritage. And I don't mean heritage as in built heritage, I mean ancestral heritage, just in the sense that there has always been strong connections between much of North America and many countries in Western Europe, and perhaps the US stronger ties to Spain, whereas Canada perhaps stronger ties with Germany. But we have to take these as a broad indication, if you like, of the sorts of countries within Europe that Americans and Canadians were considering visiting.
I think it's also very encouraging, David, just before we switch on to the final bit. You were saying, obviously, the point about it doesn't add up to 100% because people can tick multiple boxes. I wonder if that would therefore imply a certain confidence in the multi-trip visit to Europe, as we've obviously seen for many, many years in the past. I think that is something encouraging, because it means that people are perhaps feeling a little bit less concerned about, gosh, what have I got to do for COVID if I'm going to Italy and then I want to go to France? Maybe people are starting to feel more confident that that sort of travel is becoming simpler again.
I think the clearer that it becomes that you can visit parts of Europe and cross borders almost as seamlessly as you could a few years ago, then that can only entice more visitors from North America to consider Europe as a destination for the next trip. So those multi-destination tours have, over the last few months, in principle, started to become rather easier. And in fact, what we can see from this last slide, when Americans and Canadians were asked about their preferred type of destination in Europe, we can see in the middle set of bars there, we've got roughly 30% in both markets saying, I will visit different places. Now, of course, that could be different places within one country, but it is quite a strong signal that there is an openness to not just visiting one place. But I think, for me, one of the other key takeaways from this chart are those tall bars over on the far left-hand side, with roughly 50 to 55% of those quizzed in both Canada and the US saying they intend to visit a city or metropolitan area of Europe for their next trip. And that, again, is really encouraging, because throughout the pandemic, we've seen lots of evidence of people wanting to go to countryside, rural, coastal areas. But this is perhaps a good signal that tourists and tourists from North America have not fallen out of love with the idea of going to vibrant city destinations when they are thinking about their next trip.
Yes, absolutely, David. I think certainly for many ETOA members, that's exceptionally encouraging. I think also interesting, though, looking on the far right of the chart with the countryside and the rural areas, I would love to see whether that is an increase from pre-pandemic, because, of course, one thing we've spoken about as a possible silver line, if one can entertain such an idea of a pandemic, is the emergence of new destinations that people may not have previously considered, but then they'd looked at more seriously because they're perhaps a little bit more out of the way, and an opportunity for European destinations to promote some of their secondary destinations to visitors. And I wonder what your take on that might be.
Absolutely. I think one of the trends that we have seen throughout the pandemic is that people have become more aware of a broader range of types of visitor experience, be that in the countryside or in the mountainous regions or by the coast. And I think perhaps what we're seeing here is a almost subconscious realization that to get from North America to Europe, you are likely to be flying into a major city destination, whether that's Paris, London, Rome, wherever it might be, Dublin. But then perhaps a recognition that, as well as experiencing those European city destinations, there's a whole wealth of types of destination and experience to be had if you get a little bit more off the beaten track. And it opens up that opportunity to go somewhere perhaps a little bit more uncrowded and undiscovered.
Yes, absolutely. Now, David, we are sadly running out of time already on our very brief whistle-stop tour of North American demands and trends. Just to say to our listeners, you can find all sorts of charts and research and studies on our Insight Hub at etoa.org/insight, many of them summarised by David. If you don't have time to read the reports, David's written very many summaries just with the key highlights. So do please take a look at that. Otherwise, I'd like to say thank you to David Edwards for joining us again, and wish you all a very good day. Goodbye.